All right, so you wanted the inside scoop on KPR Mill's second quarter results for fiscal year 2025. We dove deep into their investor presentation, financial statements, even a letter to the stock exchange. And, well, let's just say there's more to this story than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's like getting a peek behind the curtain, right? Straight from the company itself.
Exactly. And they've left us some pretty interesting breadcrumbs to follow. Did they beat expectations? Well, the numbers tell one story, but the strategic initiatives they're hinting at paint a much more interesting picture.
For sure.
And get this, they've been quietly building up a cash stockpile. What's that all about?
Yeah, that is interesting.
But before we get into all that, the source material kind of sets the scene, right? It talks about how important the Indian textile industry is. Massive employer, huge part of the economy.
Right, and that context helps us understand KPR Mill's place within the larger ecosystem. They're a significant player.
So we're not just talking about some niche company here.
Oh, absolutely not.
And KPR Mill, they're not just spinning yarn, so to speak. I mean, they've got 6 spinning mills, 4 garment facilities, fabric processing, printing. They even produce sugar and ethanol.
Yeah, they're vertically integrated, from fiber to fashion, as they say.
Right.
That level of vertical integration is pretty unusual. It allows them to control quality and costs in ways most companies in this industry just can't.
Makes sense. And I know they're big on green power, too. Wind, solar, cogeneration, meeting 40% of their textile power needs that way.
Yeah, that's a smart move, both environmentally and financially. I mean, energy costs are a major factor in this industry.
For sure. Okay, so let's get down to the numbers. How did they actually do in Q2 and the first half of FY25?
Okay, so for Q2, their revenue came in at 1,480.02 crores.
Yeah.
EBITDA was 335.85 crores, and profit after tax, or PAT, was 205 crores. Now, for the first half of the year, revenue was 3,089.68 crores, EBITDA of 658.34 crores, and PAT of 408.31 crores.
Okay, so at first glance, things look pretty stable, right?
Yeah.
But let's peel back the layers a bit. What are we seeing when we compare these numbers to the same periods last year?
Well, first of all, their revenue is slightly down year over year, but their EBITDA margins are pretty consistent. What does this tell us? It tells us they're managing costs really well.
So even with a little dip in revenue, they're still profitable.
Right.
Now, what about the breakdown of revenue by sector? Did any areas perform particularly well or poorly?
Well, their yarn and fabric sales were down, both in value and volume, but their garment sales actually went up.
Interesting. So different parts of the business are telling different stories.
Yep.
What about sugar and ethanol?
Sugar sales were pretty steady, but there was a noticeable drop in ethanol sales, both volume and revenue.
Huh. That's interesting. Could be a blip, could be something bigger. We'll have to keep an eye on that.
Definitely.
Now, they also provided quite a bit of detail on their financial position. What stood out to you there?
Well, they've significantly reduced their borrowings, especially short-term debt. And their cash and cash equivalents have gone way up.
So they're paying down debt and building up cash. Sounds like a pretty smart move, especially if they're sensing, some uncertainty in the future.
It is. It gives them a lot more flexibility. It could also be a sign that they're, well, maybe getting ready for some acquisitions or investments.
Okay. Speaking of big moves, let's talk strategy. Now, they didn't explicitly lay out their plans in these documents, but they did drop some hints, right?
Yeah, let's play detective here for a minute. What can we infer from their actions?
Exactly.
Well, for one thing, their export market has seen some shifts. Europe is still strong. North America, steady.
And they're still paying dividends. They announced a 5 per share dividend for FY24.
Right, which sends a clear message to investors. They're confident in their future earnings, even while being, financially cautious.
Yeah. It's like they're saying, we're not just weathering the storm, we're preparing to come out stronger on the other side. It's fascinating how they're balancing, like being careful with their money, but also being ambitious. They're not just sitting on that cash. They're using it to get stronger and prep for what's next.
Exactly. And that approach, that careful but ambitious approach, it shows up in their commitment to sustainability too.
Yeah.
Remember, 40% of their textile energy needs, they're meeting that through renewable sources.
Right, right. And that's got to be good for their bottom line too, not just the environment.
Oh, for sure. It's a smart business decision. They're thinking long-term, both financially and in terms of their impact. Now, let's circle back to that drop in ethanol sales for a sec. It's a small part of their business overall, but I think it's worth thinking about why that happened.
Yeah, okay. What could be going on there?
Well, one possibility is, Recent government policy changes around biofuels, there have been some shifts in those regulations and incentives, so that could be impacting demand.
Right. And we know government policies can really shake things up, especially in a sector like textiles, which is so interconnected.
Exactly. Another possibility is that maybe there's just less demand for ethanol from consumers,
Hmm.
maybe because of fuel prices or a shift towards different energy sources.
Yeah, interesting. It's a reminder that even these little details in a company's performance can be clues about what's happening in the bigger market.
Absolutely. It shows how important it is to stay informed about all the different factors that can impact a company's success.
Couldn't agree more. So while we're talking about market trends, let's dive into KPR Mill's strategy a bit more. We already mentioned how their export markets have shifted a little.
Right.
Europe is still strong for them, while North America is holding steady. What do you make of that strategy?
Well, Europe has always been a big market for Indian textiles. It's known for having those picky consumers, high standards. So KPR Mill continuing to focus on Europe, that suggests they're really committed to those high quality products.
Makes sense. They've built a rep for quality, so they're using that to their advantage in a competitive market. What about North America?
North America, that's more of a price-sensitive market, but it's huge. So them holding steady there probably means they're balancing market share with, keeping things profitable.
Okay, so they're being strategic about where they focus their efforts, playing to their strengths.
Exactly. And this strategic approach, it's even more clear when you look at their decision to pay dividends. Remember, €5 per share for FY24.
Right, right. Which seems like they're pretty confident about making consistent returns, even while they're focused on long-term stability.
It's like, walking and chewing gum at the same time. They're being responsible with their finances and rewarding their investors.
It's a tough balance to strike. Pretty impressive.
It is. Okay, so let's take a step back here. Connect all these pieces to the big picture. We've seen how KPR Mill is doing financially, how they're managing things, their strategy. But what does it all mean for their future? What do you think?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Well, I think they're in a good spot. Financially sound, efficient, and strategic. Right. But, like we talked about, there are all those external factors that could come into play.
Right, all those things happening in the global market, they can't control that.
Exactly. So, what will determine their success is how well they adapt to those changes, anticipate challenges, and seize opportunities when they come up. And that's where their cash and their strategic mindset will really come in handy.
Yeah, it's like they're building a fortress and stocking up on supplies so they can weather any storm that comes their way.
I like that analogy. And they're not just hiding in that fortress, they're actively looking out for what's next. That's what makes this so interesting.
Okay, let's play a little what-if game. What are some of those external factors that could have the biggest impact on their future, for better or worse?
Well, the global economy, that's a big one. Like, what if there's a major downturn? That could hurt demand for textiles, put pressure on their margins.
Right, and then there are those geopolitical risks, too. Trade wars, political instability, even natural disasters could mess up supply chains.
For sure. And all those things, they can't really control them, but they need to be ready for them.
And then there's technology, right?
Mhm.
The textile industry is constantly changing. There are always new innovations popping up.
Oh, absolutely. If they fall behind in tech, they could lose their edge.
So it's like a constant race to stay ahead. But on the flip side, if they embrace those innovations, it could lead to new opportunities for growth.
Exactly. And that's where their planning and that cash reserve that could really give them an advantage. They have the resources to invest, explore new tech, maybe even buy up smaller companies that are innovating.
So it's like they're playing chess, thinking several moves ahead.
Exactly. They're thinking ahead, identifying those opportunities, getting ready to succeed in a landscape that's always changing. Now, let's bring it back to our listener for a minute. We've talked a lot about KPR Mill, but what can you learn from their story? What are those key takeaways you can apply to your own life, your own business?
Right, yeah.
Well, one big lesson is the importance of thinking long term. They're not focused on those quick wins, they're building something sustainable.
Yeah, and that's a lesson that applies to so many things in life. Building a career, managing your finances, your passions, patience and persistence. That long-term vision is key.
Absolutely. Another takeaway is balance. They're showing this amazing ability to balance being careful with their money with being ambitious. They're not reckless, but they're not afraid to take a chance when it makes sense.
It's like walking a tightrope, but they're doing it with, confidence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's a skill we can all try to develop, right? Whether it's balancing work and life, saving and spending, or going after different goals, finding that balance is crucial.
And let's not forget about adapting. The world is always changing. And the only way to really thrive is to be able to adjust to new situations, embrace that change.
Oh, definitely. Just look at how KPR Mill is handling those shifts in the export markets. They're not holding on to the past. They're evolving with the times.
Right. It's a reminder that we can't just sit back and relax. We need to keep learning, keep growing to stay ahead. And that brings up a question. How can we actually apply these lessons to our own lives?
Well, one way is to start by asking yourself, what's my long-term vision? What am I working towards? What are my goals? Once you have a sense of where you're going, you can start making choices that align with that vision.
Love that. And don't forget to check in on your progress, make changes as you go.
Exactly. KPR Mill, they're always evaluating their performance, adjusting their strategy, so we should be doing the same. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's about consistent progress towards your goals, even when things get tough.
So any practical steps our listeners can take to really develop that long-term mindset, build a strong foundation for success?
Yeah, one key thing is to make learning a habit. Whether it's books, workshops, podcasts like this one, just stay curious. Keep feeding your mind with new knowledge and ideas.
Yeah, so important. The more you learn, the more ready you'll be for those changes, those opportunities.
Absolutely. And invest in yourself. Take courses, build new skills, network, all that stuff. The more you invest in your own growth, the more valuable you become.
And don't be afraid to take risks, calculated risks. Like we saw with KPR Mill, sometimes you got to take a risk to grow.
That's right. But remember, those calculated risks are different from just like gambling. Do your research, weigh the pros and cons, have a plan.
And most importantly, believe in yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like Henry Ford said it best, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
So true. It all starts with your mindset. Believe in yourself, believe in your vision, and you're much more likely to reach your goals.
Well said. Okay, before we move on, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We talked about balance, which KPR Mill is really good at. But how can we apply that to our own lives? How do we find that balance between being careful and being ambitious, between security and growth, work and play?
Such a good question. And there's no one right answer. It's about finding what works for you, what fits your values.
Exactly. And it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
Finding that balance is an ongoing process, figuring yourself out, adjusting, growing.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mm.
Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about another thing that's key to KPR Mill's success, their commitment to innovation.
That's good to me. Okay, so we've talked about their financials, their strategy, how they're balancing risk and opportunity.
Yeah, and their commitment to sustainability. That's pretty impressive.
For sure. But there's another piece of the puzzle we haven't really explored, innovation. I mean, any company in the textile industry, they got to stay ahead of the game, right?
Oh, absolutely. The textile industry is constantly changing. New technologies, new trends, all the time.
Yeah, it's a fast-paced world. So how is KPR Mill keeping up? What are they doing to stay competitive?
Well, we don't have every detail, but there are some clues in what we've looked at. Remember their cash flow. That gives them the flexibility to invest in R&D, explore new ways of manufacturing, maybe even acquire some smaller companies with cutting-edge tech.
So they're kind of building up their arsenal for the future of textiles. But innovation isn't just about technology, is it? It's also about understanding what customers want, how tastes are changing.
You're right. And that's where things get really interesting. Remember when we talked about how younger generations are pushing for sustainability, ethical sourcing, personalized stuff?
Yeah, those are big trends, reshaping everything.
Exactly. So if KPR wants to stay relevant, they need to be aware of those changes. Thinking about things like recycled materials, reducing their impact on the environment, offering products that are customizable.
So they need to be trendsetters, not just follow the trends.
Exactly. And there are hints that they're already doing that. Their focus on green energy,
Yeah.
that shows they're serious about sustainability.
And, their vertical integration, that gives them a lot of control over their supply chain, which is helpful for ethical sourcing and transparency.
It's all connected. And that's what I love about these deep dives. We're not just looking at numbers. We're putting together a whole picture, understanding their values, their strategy, their vision.
Like we're getting a peek inside their heads.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. Their performance, strategy, the trends affecting the industry. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay, what is it?
We've talked about KPR Mill, but their story has lessons for any business, even for people in their careers. It reminds us that success isn't just about hard work. It's about being smart, adaptable, and always looking ahead.
It's about thinking strategically, making good decisions, building something that can handle challenges and seize opportunities.
Exactly. And it's about being curious, staying informed, always learning. The world keeps changing. And to really do well, you got to change with it.
Couldn't agree more. So to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has given you some insights, made you curious, maybe even inspired you to think differently about your own path to success.
Remember, it's not just about the end goal, it's about enjoying the journey.
Mm.
And you never know, you might find some amazing things along the way.
And if you do, let us know. We always love a good deep dive. Thanks for joining us.